Welcome to Fundraising Leaders with Drew, where we embark upon a journey to discover the heart and soul of nonprofit fundraising and decode the strategies that lead to fundraising success. I am your host, Drew Clancy, and I am grateful to be joined today by Mario Hicks, the Vice President for Development at New View Alliance, a nonprofit organization that focuses on creating safe environments while providing services to children in families in Western New York. In his role, Mario serves as chief storyteller and passionate advocate for transformative philanthropic initiatives. Let's jump right in with Mario. Dr. Hicks, thank you so much for taking some time today to visit with us here at Fundraising Leaders with Drew. A good, I think, opening question is tell us a little bit about how you first got involved with fundraising and what was it that sort of attracted you to this field?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning. For me, I always start with family and service. I think fundraising is all about service. Many veterans in my family, and we're going to church on Sundays, and whether it's making a gift for a particular extra initiative or something we always used to. And in addition to that, our family used to volunteer at the local nursing homes as well and bring gifts and crafts and things like that. So service is always kind of a big thing for our family and myself. The big first experience for me is actually I was a summer camp counselor at a very unique summer camp, which I'm actually on the board of now, called Cradle Beach. And it's a summer camp that serves both at-risk youth and children with special needs. And as I was working one day, our CEO at the time had come by with a couple, and he was kind of pointing some things out and wanted to introduce me to them. And I was very locked into making sure the kids were okay and doing some other stuff. I was like, and then I saw him later after that. And I was like, who was that and what's going on? It's like, oh, well, that couple, they had a child who, used to come attend camp, and they want to give us like $50,000. It's like, what? People do that? And so I kind of became more curious about his work and kind of in the nonprofit space, and kind of started my path there, and eventually connected, got my first role, which was with the Boy Scouts. So I was
Yeah.
off and running from there.
You were a college athlete, and did that experience did that play into your decision at all, or um,
I
that
mean,
part of your background?
yeah. I think as a student athlete, there's something about learning time management and um, being very focused on a goal. Those type of things are just deeply instilled in you, and especially for someone, I think track and field is the perfect, because you're trying to hit, not only win, you're looking for your best time. You've put months and months of training in, and it's very exact and precise in those elements. I would say as a student athlete, you become competitive. There's a certain competitive drive to want to be successful. And obviously we want to be successful in hitting our fundraising goals, and, how many, new board members or volunteers we're recruiting. So, and really it's all for a common goal, which is our mission. Right. And so I would say there's definitely a touch of that as a student athlete. And, even as a coach, I've coached for many years, where you're still have that drive, that fuel to be successful and celebrate the wins that come with that.
Yes, yes, yes. Um, Looking back, maybe you mentioned the YMCA. and maybe your early career, where there's some lessons kind of from those, kind of initial experiences in the fundraising world that have had a lasting impact on you today?
Absolutely. There's two critical lessons that especially early, on how critical great board leadership is, great volunteers. I'm not, a solo fundraiser. It takes a community, it takes an army to accomplish our goals. I think that's so critical. And then you also learn the lessons when you don't have those, right? And you can't replicate yourself. So there's hard lessons there, of maybe not having, the right folks on the bus. I attribute a really, successful, challenging experience was obviously during the time frame in 2020 when we're still trying to fundraise and all the doors are closed. And how do we go about doing that? And we really focused and worked hard with our volunteers and board members to tell great stories on what the need was. During that time frame, I was working at the YMCA, and so we were still considered essential, as the YMCA is one of the leading childcare providers. And so we were providing emergency childcare first responders, and how to get the word out to communities in need on how they could access our services and resources. And those stories actually attributed to a lot of our fundraising goals. And we had record breaking totals that year, based on responding to an immediate need. And we were able to keep those relationships going after things started to open up and change because they understood what we were about. So
Sure.
that's definitely a big lesson for us, is just those relationships and having good volunteers and great board members.
You mentioned stories and donor stories, as well as fundraising stories, or mission-based stories. Um, yeah, reflect a little bit more on that, the power of storytelling and fundraising, and why that is so important, and perhaps maybe some or maybe times you've seen that being particularly effective, or strategies you use to get really great stories, or using the stories to communicate the mission. Uh, Tell us a little bit about how you think about storytelling and its role in fundraising.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I use every day. I think, the big thing for us is to create a narrative that leads to a call to action. Whether that's a compelling story, whether it's something that speaks to our, strategic plan of, in that, where we're trying to go over a certain, how do you carry people with you, right? You've worked hard to get the feedback. You worked with your staff and volunteers and community to say, here's our strategic initiatives and here's the difference we're trying to make. You can't do that without carrying people with you through and seeing where they fit in, right? It's like, this is where you were a part of this tapestry, this story. So I'm really big on that. With the teams that I've led, we come from that sort of mindset. It's, how does one story stick to this thread of stories, of this whole narrative we're trying to tell, that
Ooh, I
we're
love
trying to
that.
speak to. It's larger than just the one mission moment, right? And then what are the channels that we're using to share that? It's whether it's a letter, whether it's a social media post, whether it's a stewardship moment to thank a particular donor that is going to be moved by what we're doing right now. And by the way, thank you because you've been supporting this particular thing we've been doing for a while,
Sure.
right? And so that is incredibly important. Not only the narrative and the stories we put together, but the channels that we use to communicate it over time. And then share the success of that, as we come to a close or go to the next chapter of that whole thing. I think that's incredibly critical in fundraising.
Indeed. Let's talk a little bit about relationships, another obviously critical, essential, fundamental part of fundraising, and building relationships with donors, creating relationships. Um, how do you approach that in your role? What strategies, or how do you think about building relationships with you mentioned board members, obviously, is a key constituent, but maybe, even beyond just board leadership, building relationships and how you approach that.
Yeah, I consider myself someone who needs to be active and aware in our community. I think that is the best way to, demonstrate my investment in the things that I'm trying to do. And so it's not just about networking and going to our, Chamber of Commerce, but if I do understand what are some of the larger community things that we need. Said, by the way, we're looking to do these, massive infrastructure things, or we need jobs or whatever. It's like, by the way, this is how our non-for-profit or our university fits into that. And let me tell you about it. So I make it, it's very important for me to be at a number of, community-based things in our community, right? To be a part of those conversations and then to meet individuals while I'm there and one, tell them about what we're doing and what our mission is, but learn more about them. And really when you start to kind of have those additional conversations of become curious, right? Having people build that relationship and have a conversation about and maybe they're curious is, let's connect. Let's learn more about you. Let's learn more about, some of the things that you're passionate about, because it's really about them, right?
Right.
And we're just the champions of the mission. We're just we're kind of the mirror, the window of what it is that we are as representations of that mission. But really, it's about them, and do they see themselves as being a part of what you're doing? So my conversations are all really about, not just learning more about them, but, presenting something, a case that they could see themselves being a part of it, as that conversation continues. But they have to be curious. And how do I present something that makes them curious?
Sure. Sure. Um, Thinking a little bit about, as vice president uh, of advancement at Daemen University. Major gifts obviously are a key part of the fundraising program. How do you tell us a little bit about that? What was your experience in that role in building relationships with major donors, current donors, and potential major donors?
Yeah. Uh, Daemen University was really a great experience in a sense that we really focused on doing what I would say is relationship building fundamentals um, of fundraising, right? That's working with our development team to really get a deeper understanding of not only our alumni base and their connection and history with Daemen. And Daemen had a very unique history. It's a young university, about 77 years old. And so it was very an interesting challenge with different cohorts under different names, under different programs. Daemen in itself had, I believe, 7 different athletic mascots over time.
Yeah.
So you have those different affinity groups. And so how do you, connect to what Daemen University is today? And so we had many conversations about that. And so that was an opportunity for us to go ask alums their advice, right? Our major donors, their advice on, how do we get, you're passionate about Daemen, how do we get more people just as passionate about what Daemen is doing today, or communicate with them, hey, this is not the Daemen of old, but a new Daemen that you can be a part of. And then what are the projects that we're doing that gets people excited? So, we put together strong portfolios. We went on some really great visits with some, previous donors that helped us meet new donors, and spent some time on some tours and resulted. But I think we had to have compelling vision and compelling projects to talk about the new Daemen. I
Right.
think that's what was successful for us versus some of the things that they were used to hearing. They're like, well, I know, the scholarships are nice. And it's like, well, what else you got? So, well, by the way, we're investing in a new innovative, at the time, was a gross anatomy lab for our PT, PA students. And so meeting with someone who had run a PT practice for many years, one of our alums, he's like, oh, that wasn't that, you mean that old dirty lab that I had to go to? And it's like, yeah, it's not going to be dirty anymore. And let me tell you how you can help out and how, what that's going to look like for students to come. And it wasn't just the building. It was, this is how we're bringing in new students. This is how alums can use it. This is how the community and our healthcare partners are going to use it. So it was more than just a new building with new bells and whistles. We had a compelling vision that fit into, again, that whole narrative of the new Daemen. And that's what got more of my recent major gift donors excited.
Love it. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
What advice would you offer on building authentic and lasting relationships built on kind of trust? I think is another ingredient in fundraising. How do you see that?
I think you nailed it. You start off with, how do you build trust? I think trust comes from transparency. Hey, here's what we're excited about. Here's our challenges. We know that, if you're someone who's been a part of the mission in some way, that you're connected to it. We want to keep you informed. I think trust comes from transparency and being informed, because you can't make a decision, a true decision that we want you to have, which is an informed decision. And this is why I'm giving to the mission, is because of this, this, and this. And I have been, consistently, communicated with through. Consistency matters, right? Are we showing up for our donors and prospects when they have questions? Are we thanking them in a timely manner just for taking the time to have a conversation with us, right?
Sure.
Are we following up? Hey, thanks again. Lunch was great. By the way, I'm going to send you our impact report about what we accomplished last year with the thing that I just discussed with you today. And, if you have any other questions, follow up. By the way, I'll touch base in a couple of months when we're having X, Y, or Z event that touches base on the thing that we just talked about, right? And just how do we stay consistent as it? That's an example, right?
Yeah.
Of how we continue to be there and show up for those that we want to join us in being champions of our mission. I take the philosophy of every donor that I meet is I'm trying to replicate myself in a way. And what I mean by that is beyond the gift. The gift is huge. It's transformational. But what is that donor going to say to their peer groups, their community members about, hey, I noticed that you did something really great over there for, Daemen University. Oh man, you have no idea what they're doing with the gross anatomy lab, and the students are great. By the way, you should, because I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to actually bring in a few interns to our firm. You think you want to get involved in that? Absolutely. You just told me it was great. How do we replicate ourselves through philanthropy, right? We're one major gift officer, we're one vice president, we're one executive director, whatever it might be. Our work is challenging, it's fulfilling, but at the same time, there's only one of us, or there's a team of us. We have to empower our donors to be, advocates for the mission just as much as we are. And that's how I see, if someone's willing to make a gift, that also means they're willing to tell, a story about us that's really good and positive.
Sure. 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 Love that. Let's talking a little bit about relationships and potential, major donors, potential major donors. You also, earlier in your career, have some experience working more on the annual fund. Again, a critical component of fundraising, little different perhaps from major gift. Yeah, some different, some the same. Any thoughts, ideas, strategies, things you found that have really worked for you? Thoughts on that?
I cut my teeth in annual giving. I would say I did it the old school way. I had a really great mentor at the time, and really just said, I need you to learn how to do all the segmentation, right? All of the different stories. I need you to build all of these pivot tables and manage all of the ask strings and design them and basically build out an entire program. So I got my butt kicked doing that quite a bit for some time. But from there, I really had a better understanding of our, alumni base.
Sure.
And from there, I was able to help the major gift team, in prospecting to say this annual donor may be ready. And we had some successes there based on the data that I put together and understanding that.
Sure.
And I know that's a bit more old school in comparison. I think we've done some great stories. I've able to build some annual programs. I know there's a lot of predictive modeling out there and all the fancy bells and whistles. I've never really been, I would say, in a large enough um, shop to say we need to use all those fancy bells and whistles. We need to use AI for this and predictive analytics for this and digital tools for that. So I really haven't dove into those. I've just kind of kept with the old plain and simple of you know make sure we have today make sure we have a QR code on all of our letters. So most of the time it's just a reminder for people to give online,
Sure.
right? We make sure that our crowdfunding platforms are set up in annual giving. I think crowdfunding or peer-to-peer fundraising is huge for us. I usually leverage a lot of our peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns with our annual giving promotions or appeals. I kind of tie those in, so I kind of look at it more from the what are the different channels of annual giving nowadays, and how do you build that into a comprehensive annual campaign that sits underneath your major gifts. And so, whether it's to make it a day of giving, I've done many of those. And, is that separate from your appeals group? Is that separate from, if you do some unique, peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns in there or micro campaigns? So I kind of build that into an overall strategy. And then kind of, from there, deep dive back into, our loyal donors, our live ones, side ones, our lapsed, how much we're investing in our, new donor campaigns to acquire new donors, things like that. And then making sure we're measuring when we do get new donors, where are they coming from? Was it from, this campaign or that campaign or is it from this appeal or that? So it has grown for me just sending out, letters to 100,000 alums. I think more macro or globally about it, depending on, where we are, and, what makes sense for us. So I have some colleagues who, do some massive things in annual giving. But, they have an army of folks, definitely focused on that. So I'm a bit more small shop when it comes to that. But, I still have the eye for, are we making sure we're identifying potential new prospects through annual giving, or planned giving, so.
Thinking about, so we've got our annual fund program, we've got our major gift program. In between there, right, we've got that leadership annual giving or mid-level giving. Any specific strategies or thoughts on, you know, I saw some research recently that, somebody who comes in, let's say at the $1,000 level, we've got a relatively short amount of time potentially to elevate them into the major gift group. Any thoughts around that, or how you see that, things, ways to approach that, kind of taking that leadership annual donor and potentially elevating them?
Yeah, I think for us, I love that group as kind of recruiting or cultivating the next group of leadership donors. That's
Right.
I kind of look more down than up.
Yep.
In that sense, like how can I pull more up from that group? Usually it's through, like I said, matches. We use them for challenges or matches, whether it's a collective group or something like that. That's kind of the strategy I use for my leadership folks. I say, hey, we've got the next day of giving coming up. We would like these certain amount of challenges. Would you be able to help with that? And through our cultivation and stewardship, we identify folks who could be the next group of those folks. And so how do we have them connect and they can see kind of the impact they can make through that? They're the leaders in a lot of like our day of giving campaigns. I love that group. That's how I usually leverage, those folks. And then they're a bit more comfortable to be elevated into some of those big ideas, those big, large, sustainable things that they do. And then they're still are most of the time they're still making that leadership type gift for us when we need it. You're right; it is a short period before like they got to bump up. But how can I help them? Yeah, how can
Sure.
I use that team to bring up more folks so I'm not having to scramble or saying, oh, well, we've got something big for this person. How do we, we've already got folks in the pipeline to be those next leaders. So,
Here, here. Um, Dr. Hicks, you've worked across different missions, everything from higher education, foster care, now mental health. Um, you know, how what's similar, what's different? How do you see kind of different areas or segments of kind of the nonprofit world?
yeah, I think I've been fortunate enough to have a diverse background of service, which I think is great. Um, you know, Higher education, even right now is, very challenging. You know, there is the enrollment cliff that a lot of higher education institutions are dealing with. And so, as much as philanthropy is important, how much more critically important is enrollment right now, especially for, universities and colleges in the Northeast. So I've experienced that and understanding the importance of that. And then we have, really great missions. There is a lot of need, especially in the region where I've worked all of my career. But there's a lot of need with not a lot of resources. We're not flush with foundations, very rust belt in this area. So it's been very unique and very different in certain ways. I think there's less tools or resources for some of the great missions I've served as far as on the nonprofit side, whereas higher education very a bit more um, formalized, a bit more structure, and things like that. But at the same time, creativity can be a challenge, or being responsive or nimble as you'd like in a higher education setting, versus a really great not-for-profit with a really great idea and how quickly you can move on that. There are differences, and so you kind of see some of those things, the creativity and nimbleness versus the structure and resource, right there, and kind of have more of a clear. Sometimes the mission isn't as clear, right? Sometimes all we can see is scholarships and enrollment. Not some of the more impactful, great ideas that a university or college can do. And so having to kind of break through that, sort of assumptions about, university and colleges is a challenge versus a non-for-profit where it's very clear we help, everyday children. We help the under-resourced. We help children with special needs. We help cancer patients. So those things are a bit more clear on saying this is what the impact is going to be. So there's kind of some of those differences as well, right?
Share a little bit at New View Alliance some of the opportunities you see. You're touching on them already, but maybe building on that, or maybe some of the specific challenges and how you're thinking about those and strategies to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So New View Alliance in itself is unique, for the area. Um, Human service non-for-profits that deal in mental health, foster care, and adoption traditionally will grow or merge or partner in some way. New View Alliance oversees two great non-for-profits that serve our community in Western New York. So they're in an alliance and a partnership, not a full merger.
Sure.
So there are unique challenges and opportunities with that. So overseeing not only fundraising, philanthropy, development, marketing as well. How do we come up with a cohesive narrative and message that I mentioned earlier in our conversation is one of the challenges that we're tackling. I think we're doing a great job. With that, you have two separate, constituent affinity for their mission. They're both over 100 years old. And you have passionate groups, and sometimes that builds a little tribalism and protectionist of who we are and what we do, and so you have some of those unique challenges or opportunities, right? But at the same time, how do we continue to focus on the mission? And so, early, those are some of the things that I've seen and experienced. But we found a way to come together on some larger things. We're both co-branding a lot of stuff now. And with that, I've put together our first newsletter and mission impact report as a co-branded, that brings all of those great mission moments and stories together. We have a communication campaign around some of the changes with our donors, but also to reassure them that their impact is still the same, if not greater. So, it's really kind of that repetitive, showing up, right now. So as I'm introducing myself, I'm also committing to them that, hey, we're still here. There may be some changes, but they're all changes for the better. And this is how you can help. And so it's a very exciting challenge and opportunity. And even getting our foundation boards together, who have not spent much time together in the first place, I said, well, they need to get together, right? We need to figure out how we can work, to make a larger impact. So, where one not-for-profit was currently serving a little bit of our more rural areas, now you have the opportunity and access to serve all 8 counties of Western New York. And so, how exciting is that, right? And so, turning the story to something that pushes us forward while also respecting the past, right? And how do you do that? And how do we become good listeners of those, even if they are upset? And so I've always said this about a donor who's upset with us. It means that's still a good thing. That means they care, right?
Yeah.
You're always concerned. You're concerned about those who have shut you out completely. So we're in a very unique situation. And I it's going really well. Our team has embraced the challenge, and it's very exciting.
Love it. Love it. Let's talk a little bit about kind of new trends in fundraising. Certainly technology, AI is, the talk of everything. What, as well as shifting kind of donor expectations. Where do you see the biggest opportunities right now for nonprofits to innovate and in service of the mission?
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of being a part of larger conversations. I know that sounds very grandiose. I think sometimes we get so, and I'm just talking about nonprofits, I think we get so narrow focused on what it is we do that we don't realize that we are part of these larger conversations. And whether that's to partner, I think a big thing that nonprofits need to really focus on is, stronger, I would say, public-private type relationships. I think impact investing is huge. So I think there's certain larger, advantages to being a part of those types of things. Whether it's, I love, certain firms that are very strongly involved in impact investing. I think, that is a trend that is growing. Collective impact. So for a large enough community, if we're looking to tackle one or two things, how is the nonprofit community involved? How are our corporate job creators involved? How is government involved in your area? And then how are we effectively distributing the resources around one topic, right? And so being a part of a larger conversation, I think, really brings so many more people and diverse ideas to the table, that you won't realize how, big of a swing we can take. I mean, I love taking big swings, taking a big bite out of something. And I think because we're so focused on our resources that we don't realize that if we expand our vision a bit, that there are more resources to be had, right? We love obviously our donors. We love our volunteers, our board members, and that is where our focus should be, but how can't we help everyone kind of think about something a bit larger, right? So I think those are some of the trends. Obviously, we have, we're dealing more with donor advised funds.
Yeah.
Even our donors are thinking differently in that sense and how they go about investing their funds, right, for the long term. So even the structure of those some certain things would make us kind of, there's an incentive for us to think bigger, right? And so I think those are the things that are more of emerging trends that need to be discussed, that need to be invested in, that we need to think critically and strategically about on how we fit into those larger conversations.
Love that. What, thinking about leadership, uh, challenges, obviously, unexpected challenges. Can you share a time, Dr. Hicks, where, it's been a situation that really tested you professionally and um, how you rose above that or worked through that?
Yeah, I think there's always, for anyone in a development role, I think, at least in my experience, and I think some of my colleagues or peers in their space can speak to it, I think there's always been a challenge of managing up. Um, I think that's something that is a skill or a muscle we need to kind of build in to have that. And I've had challenges with managing up and saying, here's clearly what's being communicated or here's what the need is. And, that hasn't always, been successful. Like, well, we're going to do this way anyway, 'cause that's the way we've always done it. And that's where, what I know is successful. And, sometimes that hasn't, I haven't overcome that. When I have overcome it, I've had to demonstrate value and I had the right buy-in from, the collective group to take a shot at something. Uh, you know, but having enough of a compelling argument in that managing up conversation to say, inevitably, what's the harm? What is the overall harm to trying it this way versus that way? And I think a lot of fundraisers, when it comes to whether it's donor relationships, but well, I know they're interested in X, but we need a new building. And, it's like, well, that's great. How can we bring them along in this conversation about this building versus you telling me to go ask them to pay for the building? Right. And so even some of those one-on-one individual conversations and I think for a lot of leaders in our role is even to the board, is how do we manage up or how do we, put together a clear path forward for our board to govern appropriately. And so those are the big things that I think, there's challenges in our seat and it's really just managing up.
Love that. Right on. Right on. Final question. I usually wrap up with what advice would you give someone new to the field? Someone, let's say, right out of college, coming into fundraising and advancement. Um, what would you suggest they do, or how might they think about the experiences they need to be successful?
I would say to anyone coming into our field, is to ask and ask often. Start early. I would go back to my first role, and my immediate supervisor said, "Hey, someone needs to help with us getting a sponsorship for the local Pinewood Derby." And I had no idea how much we needed. I had no idea, but the first thing I did is I said, "Yes. How do I do that?" Well, I just need you to call someone. Okay, great. Uh, no, let me think about that. And oh, well, it's a Pinewood Derby, so maybe there are car dealerships who would support something like this, and kind of find my own way. I think sometimes you need an opportunity for someone to let you try something, but you have to ask for that opportunity, take initiative, and then start asking for a gift and whatever capacity you're allowed to do that. I think that is something that goes beyond just the fundraising aspect. I think it's big as far as all the work we do in development is asking. And how do you thoughtfully do that? How do you handle, or how do you, I call it, how do you find the no that you need so that you can move forward, right? This is not a good fit right now for this person. Let's keep cultivating. Let's move here. But we finally got them to say they're not interested right now. Great. You know, and so I think you have to ask and ask often and find opportunities to ask. I think that is important for anyone starting in the field.
Love it. All right. Well, thank
Uh,
you again for your time, your experiences, sharing best practices, innovative ways of thinking about fundraising. And I hope you have an awesome day.
all right. You too. Thanks again for the time and the opportunity.